Malric, the Lycan king who had forgotten how to be a man. King Malric didn't rule his kingdom, he haunted it. His generals were terrified of him, his enemies were dead, and his temper was a ticking time bomb that threatened to level the entire palace. Then walked in Kaia. She wasn't a noble, she wasn't a diplomat. She was a mercenary with a rusted sword, mud on her boots, and absolutely zero survival instinct. When she walked into the most dangerous room in the world and treated the alpha of alphas like a misbehaving puppy, the entire court stopped breathing. They expected a massacre. Instead, they got a romance that would burn the world down. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's chapter, I just wanted to take a second to appreciate this amazing community we're building here. It is honestly so cool to think that we are all listening to this same story together, but from completely different corners of the world. Whether you're winding down for the night, starting your morning commute, or just taking a break, I'd love to know where you are joining us from. So head down to the comments right now and drop your city or country. Let's see just how far our pack reaches today. All right, get comfortable, grab a drink, and let's get into the story. The strategy map was covered in spittle and bad ideas. "We flank them at the ravine," General Blaze shouted, his face turning a shade of purple that suggested an imminent stroke. "We send the 3rd Legion into the throat of the valley and crush the Scourge against the rock face." King Malric didn't shout. He didn't have to. He simply leaned over the massive mahogany table, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge. A low, vibrating growl started deep in his chest, a sound so primal that the 3 seasoned generals in the room instinctively took a step back, baring their throats in submission. Malric's eyes, usually a piercing gold, were bleeding into the pitch black of his wolf. "The 3rd Legion," Malric said, his voice a quiet landslide, "would be slaughtered in 12 minutes. The Scourge doesn't fight in formation, Blaze. They swarm. If you send my men into that valley, you are feeding them to the meat grinder." "But, Your Majesty—" "Get out," Malric snarled. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the ozone scent of high-grade alpha pheromones. "Get out before I rip your—" The heavy oak doors to the war room didn't just open, they were kicked wide with enough force to crack the hinges. Every head snapped toward the entrance. The 2 royal guards stationed outside were currently groaning on the floor, clutching their stomachs. Stepping over them was a woman who looked like she had just crawled out of a landslide and was annoyed about it. Kaia, the self-proclaimed Valkyrie of the Waste, brushed a layer of gray dust off her leather shoulder pauldron. She wasn't wearing court finery. She was clad in mismatched armor, scavenged jagged steel over hardened leather, and she smelled like rain, old iron, and horse sweat. She ignored the stunned silence. She ignored the open mouths of the generals. She walked straight to the table, her heavy combat boots leaving muddy prints on the pristine velvet carpet. "Who are you?" General Blaze sputtered, reaching for his ceremonial sword. "How dare you interrupt the—" "Oh, shut up, you old windbag," Kaia said, her voice raspy and bored. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on the map. "I could hear your stupidity from the hallway. Flanking at the ravine? Really? You might as well marinate the soldiers in barbecue sauce before you send them in." Malric straightened up. The beast inside him, which had been seconds away from tearing Blaze's head off, suddenly paused. It sniffed the air. Her. Malric stared at the intruder. She was small compared to the Lycans in the room, but she took up space like a giant. "You have 5 seconds to explain why you aren't dead," Malric rumbled, the threat rolling off him in waves. Kaia finally looked at him. Most people trembled when they met King Malric's gaze. Kaia just looked disappointed. She drew the massive, chipped claymore from her back. The sound of metal sliding against leather hissed through the room. The generals gasped. The king's personal guard leveled their spears. Kaia didn't attack. She swung the heavy blade in a lazy arc and slammed the tip of it into the mahogany table with a deafening crack, embedding it 3 inches deep into the wood, right between 2 map markers. "You are vibrating with anxiety," Kaia said, pointing a scarred finger at the king's chest. "You're blocking my view of the southern border, and your pheromones are giving me a headache." The room went deathly silent. Time seemed to suspend. "Sit down, pup," she ordered, her voice cracking like a whip. "Before you lose this war." General Blaze closed his eyes, waiting for the blood splatter. But Malric didn't strike. He looked at the fierce, terrifying creature standing before him. He felt the snap of something ancient and undeniable click into place in his chest. His beast, usually a chaotic storm, curled up and purred. A slow, dark grin spread across the king's face. It was the smile of a predator who had finally found prey that could bite back. Malric sank into his high-backed chair, crossed his massive arms, and tilted his head. "Yes, my lord," he said softly. He gestured to the map with one hand, his golden eyes burning into hers. "Now that you have my attention, mercenary, try to keep it." General Blaze looked like he had swallowed a live toad, then realized the toad was also disappointed in him. The silence in the war room was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Or, in this case, the jagged claymore currently vibrating in the expensive mahogany table. "This is treason!" Blaze finally shrieked, his hand shaking as he pointed a manicured claw at Kaia. "Guards, seize this! This stray! She has threatened the king!" The two guards who had recovered from Kaia's entrance scrambled to their feet, spears leveled. Kaia didn't even flinch. She kept her eyes locked on King Malric, who was still lounging in his chair with the casual elegance of an apex predator watching a nature documentary. "I didn't threaten him," Kaia said, her voice dry as dust. "I gave him an order. There's a difference. One implies I want to hurt him. The other implies I want him to stop acting like an idiot so I don't have to clean up his mess." She yanked her sword out of the table with a wet shunk, sending a spray of wood chips onto General Blaze's immaculate uniform. She used the tip of the blade to trace a red line across the map, carving a deep groove into the parchment. "Here," she said, tapping a mountain pass. "You want to send the heavy infantry through the Razor Pass. It's narrow, steep, and prone to rock slides. The Scourge isn't stupid, General. They aren't just mindless ghouls anymore. They have spotters. They'll drop half the mountain on your boys before they even draw steel." Malric leaned forward, his amusement sharpening into interest. "And what would you do, mercenary?" "I'd use the merchant tunnels beneath the ridge," Kaia replied instantly. "They're tight, they smell like rat piss, and they haven't been used in a century. The Scourge won't be watching the ground beneath their feet. We pop up behind their front line, sever the head of the command unit, and the rest of the hive-mind panics." Malric looked at Blaze. "Did you know about the tunnels?" Blaze stammered, wiping wood chips off his medals. They are not on the official military topographic survey, Your Majesty. They are myths." "They are on the smuggler's maps," Kaia corrected, "which you would know if you spent less time polishing your boots and more time drinking in the taverns where the real information lives." Malric stood up. The movement was fluid, silent, and terrifyingly fast. He towered over the table, his shadow swallowing Kaia's small frame. But she didn't step back. She tilted her chin up, meeting his golden gaze with a challenge of her own. "You're hired," Malric said simply. "I haven't named my price," Kaia countered. "Name it." "I don't want gold," Kaia said, her voice dropping an octave. "I want authority. Total operational command. When I give an order, your shiny little soldiers jump. If General Blaze questions me in the field, I have the right to strip him of his rank and use him as bait." "Done," Malric said. "And," Kaia added, narrowing her eyes, "I operate alone, no handlers, no babysitters. I sleep where I want. I eat what I want." Malric's smile faltered, replaced by a dark, possessive glint that made the hair on the back of Kaia's neck stand up. He walked around the table, stopping inches from her. He smelled like cedar, blood, and the terrifying promise of violence. "You will have command of my armies, Kaia of the Waste," Malric murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But you have just humiliated 3 high-ranking nobles and exposed the weakness of my council. If I let you sleep in the barracks, you'll be dead by morning with a knife in your back." "I sleep with one eye open," she snapped. "Then you'll be tired," Malric countered. He turned to the guards. "Prepare the royal guest suite, the one in the East Wing." Kaia bristled. "The East Wing? That's the royal family's quarters." "It's the most secure wing in the Citadel," Malric said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If you are to save my kingdom, I need you alive. Consider it a mandatory perk of the job." 10 minutes later, Kaia was standing in the middle of a room that cost more than her entire mercenary company. The bed was covered in silk, the fireplace was roaring, and there was a bowl of fruit that looked too perfect to be real. It was a gilded cage, and she hated it. She tossed her sword onto the velvet duvet and began to pace, checking the perimeter. Windows, barred. Main door, heavy oak, lockable from the inside, secure. She relaxed, just slightly. Maybe the king wasn't plotting anything. Maybe he was just paranoid. Then she saw it. On the far wall, half hidden behind a tapestry, was a second door. Kaia walked over, pushed the tapestry aside, and tried the handle. It turned silently. The door swung open without a creak. It revealed another bedroom, a massive, masculine space dominated by a bed large enough for a giant, smelling faintly of cedar and alpha power. Kaia froze as she saw King Malric standing in the middle of the room, unbuttoning his ceremonial tunic. He paused, looking up at her through the open doorway. He wasn't surprised to see her, there was no lock on the door, and it opened from his side too. Kaia stared at the expanse of King Malric's chest, a landscape of scars and corded muscle that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He didn't rush to cover himself. In fact, he tossed his shirt onto a nearby chair and leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "There is no lock," Kaia said, her voice flat. "I removed it," Malric replied, his tone infuriatingly calm. "If the Scourge breaches the East Wing, I can be at your side in 3 seconds. If I have to fumble with a key, it takes 5. 2 seconds is the difference between you fighting a hollow and you becoming one. And who protects me from you?" Kaia asked, narrowing her eyes. Malric's golden eyes flashed. He took a half step forward, his voice dropping into a register that vibrated in the floorboards. "If I wanted you, Kaia, a locked door wouldn't be an obstacle, it would be an appetizer." Kaia didn't blink. She reached out, grabbed the handle of the heavy oak door, and slammed it in his face. Then, with a grunt of effort, she dragged a solid marble bust of some long-dead ancestor and wedged it firmly under the handle. "Sleep tight, Your Majesty," she muttered. The next morning, the royal training grounds looked less like a military installation and more like a parade. The royal guard stood in perfect formation. Their silver armor was polished to a mirror sheen. Their capes were pressed. They looked magnificent, expensive, and completely useless. Kaia walked down the line, her boots crunching on the gravel. She stopped in front of the captain of the guard, a man named Blaze who had a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and an ego to match. "Is there a problem, Commander?" Blaze sneered the title like it was a slur. "Or are you just admiring the view? We aren't used to taking orders from stray dogs." Kaia looked him up and down. "Your gorget is loose. Your center of gravity is too high. And you smell like lavender soap. If a Scourge wolf catches that scent, he won't just kill you, he'll laugh while he does it." The soldiers snickered. Blaze flushed crimson. "Draw steel," Blaze barked, ripping his ceremonial longsword from its sheath. "Let's see if you fight as well as you insult." Up on the observation balcony, King Malric leaned against the stone railing, watching. A frantic aide rushed up to him. "Sire, Captain Blaze is a dueling champion. He'll kill her. You must stop this." Malric didn't look away. "If she can't beat Blaze, she can't beat the Scourge. Let them bleed." Below, the duel began. Blaze fought with textbook precision. He lunged, parried, and executed a perfect feint. It was elegant. It was beautiful. It was also stupid. Kaia didn't block his strikes. She dodged them, moving with the fluid, jerky rhythm of a street fighter. When Blaze went for a high strike, expecting a clash of steel, Kaia dropped to the dirt. She kicked his back knee hard enough to snap cartilage. Blaze roared, stumbling. Before he could recover, Kaia scooped up a handful of gravel and threw it directly into his eyes. My eyes! He screamed, blindingly swinging his sword. Kaia stepped inside his guard, slammed the pommel of her claymore into his solar plexus, and swept his legs. The captain of the guard hit the ground with a clang that sounded like a kitchen falling downstairs. Kaia placed her boot on his chest and the tip of her blade against his throat. "You're dead," she announced to the silent yard. "You fought for points. I fought for survival. The Scourge doesn't care about honor, and neither do I. From now on, you train without armor, you train in the mud, and if I smell lavender again, I'm shaving you bald." She sheathed her sword and turned her back on him, dismissing him as a threat. Up on the balcony, Malrik felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly knocked the wind out of him. "Mine," his beast growled. "She is a warlord." But in the dust of the arena, humiliation had turned Blaze feral. As Kaia walked away, the captain scrambled to his knees. His hand went to his boot, pulling out a hidden dagger coated in a shimmering green resin. Paralytic wolfsbane. "I am not finished with you, bitch!" Blaze screamed, lunging at her exposed back. "Kaia!" Malrik roared from the balcony, vaulting over the railing. But he was too far away. Blaze was inches from plunging the poisoned blade into her spine. Kaia didn't turn around. She didn't look. She simply stopped walking, her hand snapping back with supernatural speed, catching Blaze's wrist midair. The dagger froze an inch from her armor. "You scream before you strike," Kaia said, her voice conversational, as if she were critiquing a painting rather than holding off a murder attempt. "It ruins the element of surprise. Amateur." She twisted her hips and yanked Blaze's arm downward. The sound of his wrist snapping was loud enough to echo off the stone walls. Blaze shrieked, dropping the poisoned blade into the mud. Kaia didn't stop there. She spun, driving her elbow into his jaw, knocking him cold before he hit the ground. A heavy thud shook the earth behind her. King Malrik had landed, crouching in the crater his impact had made in the training yard gravel. He rose to his full height, his eyes burning with a mixture of relief and homicidal rage directed at the unconscious captain. "I was handling it," Kaia said, wiping dust from her vambraces. "He tried to kill you," Malrik growled, his claws lengthening. "I will mount his head on the—" "Save the decorating tips," Kaia interrupted. She kicked the green-coated dagger toward the king. "Wolfsbane resin. Expensive. Hard to get. Your captain didn't buy that on a soldier's salary. Someone paid him to do it." Malrik stared at the blade, his expression darkening. Before he could respond, a frantic bell began to toll from the main gate, the signal for a returning patrol. But the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't the steady toll of arrival. It was the erratic, panicked clanging of an emergency. "Open the gates!" a sentry screamed from the wall. "He's breached! He's breached!" Kaia and Malrik exchanged a look and sprinted toward the courtyard entrance. A solitary horse thundered through the archway, carrying a rider who was slumped over the saddle horn. The horse was foaming at the mouth, terrified. As the animal skidded to a halt, the rider tumbled off, hitting the cobblestones with a wet smack. It was a young scout, no older than 18. His skin was gray, and thick black veins were pulsing beneath his flesh, spreading out from a jagged bite mark on his neck. "Get a healer," a guard shouted, rushing forward to help the boy up. "Don't touch him!" Kaia's voice was a thunderclap. She drew her claymore, the steel singing as it cleared the scabbard. "Back away! Everyone back away!" The guard hesitated, looking at the king. "Do as she says," Malrik roared. The scout on the ground began to convulse, his back arched unnaturally, his spine cracking with a sound like dry firewood snapping. He opened his mouth to scream, but only a gurgling black bile poured out. "It's the Scourge," Kaia said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He's turning. It's too late." "He's just a boy," the guard pleaded. "He's shifting to heal himself." "That isn't a shift," Kaia said grimly. "It's an eviction." The boy's body twisted, his jaw unhinged, dropping to his chest. His eyes rolled back, dissolving into pools of inky blackness. The fur that burst from his skin wasn't the healthy, lustrous coat of a Lycan. It was patchy, matted, and smelled of rotting meat. The creature that rose to its feet wasn't a wolf. It was a hollow, a mockery of life, driven only by a parasitic hunger. The hollow let out a shriek that sounded like grinding metal and lunged at the nearest guard. The soldier froze, paralyzed by the horror of seeing his friend turn into a monster. Kaia didn't freeze. She moved faster than thought. She tackled the guard out of the way, rolling to her feet in a fluid motion. As the hollow snapped its jaws at empty air, Kaia swung her claymore. It wasn't a graceful duel. It was a butchery. The heavy blade sheared through the creature's neck, severing the head completely. The body collapsed, twitching. The head rolled to a stop at Malric's boots, the black eyes still blinking, the jaws still snapping. Silence descended on the courtyard. The soldiers stared at Kaia with a mixture of awe and terror. She stood over the corpse, breathing hard, black blood dripping from her sword. She didn't look like a hero. She looked like an executioner. Malric walked over to her. He looked at the dead boy, then at Kaia. "You didn't hesitate." "Hesitation is how you die," she said, wiping her blade on the dead creature's tunic. "Burn the body. Burn the horse. Burn the clothes of anyone who touched him." She knelt beside the headless corpse, ignoring the stench, and began to rifle through the pockets of the scout's tattered uniform. "What are you doing?" Malric asked, his voice low. "Show the dead some respect." "The dead don't need respect, they need answers," Kaia muttered. She pulled out a crumpled, blood-stained letter. "Scouts don't carry written orders. They memorize them to prevent interception. Why did he have this?" She unfolded the paper. Inside, wrapped in the parchment, was a heavy gold coin. It wasn't currency. It was a medallion stamped with a specific crest, a hawk gripping a serpent. Kaia held it up to the light. "Do you recognize this sigil, pup?" Malric's face went pale, his golden eyes widening in disbelief. "That's impossible," he whispered. "That is the royal seal of the high priest. He hasn't left the sanctuary in 10 years. "Well," Kaia said, flipping the coin into the air and catching it. "It looks like the holy man just paid for a delivery of the plague directly to your doorstep." The high priest's coin sat on the strategy table between a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a map that looked like it had been drawn by a drunk spider. It was 3 a.m. The castle was asleep, but the king's private study was thick with tension, firelight, and the smell of ozone. "We can't just arrest him," Malric said, pacing the length of the rug. He had shed his formal tunic hours ago, leaving him in a thin linen shirt that did absolutely nothing to hide the width of his shoulders. "The high priest controls the spiritual narrative of the pack. If I drag him to the dungeons without irrefutable proof, half the kingdom will revolt. They think he speaks for the ancestors." "He speaks for his wallet," Kaia muttered, rubbing her eyes. She was still in her armor, refusing to take it off even in the sanctuary of the king's quarters. "That coin proves he paid the courier. It doesn't prove he knew what was in the package. He'll claim he was donating to charity." She leaned over the map, tracing the supply lines with a calloused finger. "We need to catch him in the act. We need to find where the Scourge are being bred. You don't get a synchronized infection like that scout without a nursery." Malric stopped pacing. He walked to the table, coming to a stop directly behind her. He didn't touch her, but his heat radiated against her back, a solid wall of alpha presence. Kaia stiffened, her instincts screaming at her to either fight or flee. She did neither. She kept her finger on the map, though it trembled slightly. "You're exhausted, Kaia," Malric said softly. "Your heart rate is erratic." "My heart rate is fine," she lied. "It's your proximity that's annoying. You loom. It's a bad habit." "I don't loom," Malric countered, leaning in closer until his breath stirred the loose hair at her temple. "I observe." He reached past her, not to grab her, but to move a candle closer to the map. As his hand brushed hers, he paused. His thumb grazed a jagged white scar that ran from her knuckles to her wrist. It was an ugly mark, the kind left by a serrated blade that had twisted deep. Most men looked at Kaia's scars with pity or revulsion. Malric traced the line of raised skin with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. "Barbed wire?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Goblin trap," Kaia corrected, pulling her hand back sharply. "I was 16. I learned that day not to reach for bait unless you can see the hook." Malric looked at her, his golden eyes dark with an emotion that terrified her more than any goblin. "You wear your survival like armor." "It is armor," she snapped, stepping away from the table to put distance between them. "Don't psychoanalyze me, Malric. I'm here to win a war, not to be your tragic backstory." Malric smiled, a slow, dangerous curling of his lips. "I don't think you're tragic, Kaia. I think you're inevitable." The air between them crackled, heavy and electric. For a moment, Kaia thought he was going to cross the room. She realized, with a jolt of panic, that she might let him. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was sharp and rhythmic, breaking the spell. They both spun toward the heavy stained glass window. A massive black raven was perched on the sill outside, pecking insistently at the glass. Tied to its leg was a crimson canister. "That's not a royal messenger," Kaia said, her hand instantly going to the hilt of her dagger. Malric strode to the window and threw the latch. The bird hopped inside, shook the snow from its feathers, and extended its leg. Malric untied the canister, and the bird immediately took flight, vanishing back into the night. "No message," Malric said, cracking the seal. "Just coordinates." He pulled out a slip of parchment and walked back to the light. He read the numbers, his brow furrowing. "Sector 4, Blackwood Ridge. It's a mining outpost abandoned years ago." "Who sent it?" Kaia asked, looking over his shoulder. Malric held the paper up to the candlelight. His face went ashen. "I did," he whispered. Kaia looked at the paper. The handwriting was bold, sweeping, and aggressive. It was unmistakably King Malric's script. It even had his personal signature flourish at the bottom. "I've been in this room with you for 6 hours," Kaia said slowly. "You didn't write that." "I know," Malric said, his voice turning cold as the grave. "But this is my hand, every curve, every stroke, it's perfect." "It's a forgery," Kaia said, grabbing the paper. "A master forgery." "Or," Malric said, looking at the door to the hallway with sudden paranoia, "it's a challenge. Someone wants us at Blackwood Ridge, and they want us to think it was my idea." "It's a trap," Kaia stated. "Obviously," Malric agreed, reaching for his sword belt. "Grab your gear, warlord. We're leaving in 10 minutes. "We're walking into the trap?" Kaia asked incredulously. Malric drew his blade, the steel glinting in the firelight. "We aren't just walking into it, Kaia. We're going to spring it and see whose fingers get caught." Blackwood Ridge was less of a geographical feature and more of a threat carved into the earth. The abandoned mining outpost sat in a bowl of jagged obsidian peaks, the wind howling through the empty shafts like a choir of dying things. Kaia reined in her horse, her eyes scanning the tree line. The fog was thick here, clinging to the ground in unnatural, swirling eddies. "It's a kill box," she observed, her voice barely rising above the wind. "High ground on 3 sides, only one exit. If I were going to murder a king, this is exactly where I'd do it. It's almost poetic." Malric dismounted, his boots hitting the frozen mud with a heavy thud. He didn't look worried. He looked hungry. He began to unbuckle his heavy cloak, tossing it over his saddle. "You appreciate the aesthetics of my assassination?" "I appreciate competence," Kaia said, sliding off her mount and drawing her claymore. "And whoever picked this spot knows what they're doing. The question is, are we fighting men or monsters?" As if in answer, the fog ahead of them rippled. It started as a low vibration in the ground, a rhythmic thrumming that shook the pebbles at their feet. Then came the smell, sulfur, rot, and the coppery tang of old blood. From the shadows of the mine shafts, eyes began to open. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They weren't the reflective gold or amber of natural wolves. They were void black, weeping an inky fluid. "Hollows," Kaia hissed. "A whole pack of them." Not a pack, Malric corrected, his voice distorting, deepening into a growl that vibrated in Kaia's chest. A swarm. He didn't wait for a command. Malric threw his head back and roared, a sound that shattered the stillness of the ridge. His body contorted, bones cracking and reshaping with sickening speed. Most shifters took time to turn. Malric shifted violently, exploding out of his human form in a spray of shredded fabric. Where the king had stood, a nightmare now crouched. His wolf form was massive, easily the size of a draft horse, with fur as black as the obsidian rocks and teeth that looked like serrated daggers. The hollows charged. It wasn't a battle, it was a collision. Malric launched himself into the center of the swarm, a wrecking ball of muscle and rage. He snapped the spine of the lead hollow with a single bite, tossing the carcass aside like a rag doll. Kaia didn't hang back. She moved in the king's wake, covering his blind spots. She was a blur of steel, her claymore decapitating any hollow that tried to flank the alpha. "Left!" Kaia screamed over the din of snarling beasts. Malric didn't question her. He didn't look. He simply lashed out with his left hind leg, crushing the skull of a leaping hollow that Kaia hadn't been able to reach. They fought as one organism. When Malric was overwhelmed, Kaia slid beneath his belly, hamstringing his attackers. When Kaia was cornered, Malric circled back, his massive jaws snapping closed around her enemies. It was brutal, bloody, and terrifyingly efficient. "Clear the ridge!" Kaia shouted, spotting a group of hollows gathering on a rock outcropping to jump onto Malric's back. She didn't run away from the massive wolf. She ran at him. She planted a boot on Malric's hock, vaulted onto his shoulders, and launched herself into the air. She landed on the outcropping, her sword swinging in a deadly arc, clearing the high ground in seconds. Silence fell as the last hollow hit the dirt, twitching. The snow was stained black with corruption. Kaia stood panting, wiping gore from her eyes. Down in the valley, the massive black wolf stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving. He looked up at her, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with the fight. He chuffed, a low, approving sound. "Good dog," Kaia breathed, adrenaline making her hands shake. Malric shifted back. The transition was smoother this time, though he was left kneeling in the snow, naked and steaming in the cold air. He stood up, unbothered by the cold or his nudity, and walked toward her. "We work well together," Malric said, a grin tugging at the corner of his bloody mouth. "I haven't had this much fun in a decade." "You have a twisted definition of fun," Kaia said, sheathing her sword. She jumped down from the rocks to meet him. "But we cleared them. Now we need to find out who sent—" She stopped. Malric was standing tall, looking invincible, but there was a tear in the flesh of his left forearm. It was small, barely a graze from a hollow's claw, but it wasn't bleeding red. A thick black smoke was curling up from the wound, smelling like burning hair. "Malric," Kaia said, her voice trembling for the first time that night. "It's nothing," Malric said, glancing down. "Just a scratch." "No," Kaia whispered, stepping closer. She watched as the black smoke began to twist, forming tiny, vein-like tendrils that started to crawl under his skin, moving up his arm toward his heart. "That's not a scratch. It's a fuse." "Sit down," Kaia ordered, her voice tight with a panic she refused to show. "I'm fine," Malric grunted, flexing his arm. The black veins pulsed in response, shooting another inch toward his elbow. "It's just a reaction to the necrotic saliva. My healing factor will burn it out." "Your healing factor is feeding it, you idiot," Kaia snapped. She grabbed his uninjured shoulder and shoved him toward a flat-topped boulder sheltered by the overhang of the mine entrance. "The Scourge is parasitic. It eats energy. If you try to heal, you're just serving it a 5-course meal." Malric stumbled back, landing heavily on the rock. He looked down at the wound with mild fascination, as if he were observing a science experiment rather than his own potential death. "You know a lot about biomagical warfare for a mercenary." "I read," Kaia muttered. She ripped the heavy wool cloak from her saddlebag and threw it at him. "Cover yourself. It's hard to perform emergency surgery when I'm staring at the crown jewels." Malric caught the cloak, a smirk touching his lips. Distracted, warlord? Disgusted, she lied, dropping to her knees beside him. She pulled a silver flask of high-proof whiskey from her belt and doused the wound. Malric hissed, his muscles jumping, but he didn't pull away. The black smoke reacted violently to the alcohol, screeching like a tea kettle. This is going to hurt, Kaia warned, drawing her dagger. I have to cut the corrupted flesh out before it hits the brachial artery. If it reaches your heart, you turn. If you turn, I have to cut your head off. And I really don't want to explain to the council why I came back with a headless king. Proceed, Malric said, his eyes locked on her face. Kaia didn't hesitate. She carved. Malric didn't scream. He made a low, guttural sound in his throat, his free hand gripping the edge of the rock until the stone pulverized under his fingers. Kaia worked fast, her hands steady despite the adrenaline crashing through her system. She sliced away the black, smoking meat until clean, red blood welled up. Fire, she demanded. Malric snapped his fingers, summoning a small flame at the tip of his thumb, a parlor trick of the royal bloodline. Kaia heated her blade until it glowed cherry red, then pressed it flat against the raw wound. The smell of searing flesh filled the small cave. Malric roared then, a sound of pure agony, his head falling back against the stone wall. Done, Kaia breathed, tossing the dagger into the snow to cool. She grabbed a bandage roll and began to wrap the arm tightly. It's out. You're clear. Malric panted, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at the bandage, then at Kaia. The pain seemed to have sobered him, stripping away the playful arrogance, leaving something raw and intense in its place. You stayed, he said roughly. Most mercenaries would have left me to turn and looted the corpse. I still haven't been paid, Kaia said, refusing to meet his eyes as she tied the knot on the bandage. I don't work for free. Liar, Malric whispered. He reached out with his good hand, catching her chin and forcing her to look at him. His skin was burning hot, the fever of the battle still raging in his blood. We fought as one, Malric murmured, leaning in. The space between them evaporated. I have never in my life felt a connection like that in battle. You moved before I thought. You killed what I couldn't reach. It's called tactics, Malric, Kaia said, though her breath hitched. Don't make it weird. It's not tactics, he growled, his thumb tracing her lower lip. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the gold. It's the bond. You feel it. I know you feel it. My beast wants to lay the world at your feet. The air in the cave grew heavy, charged with the scent of pine, blood, and arousal. Malric leaned closer, his intent unmistakable. He was going to kiss her, and for a terrifying split second, Kaia wanted him to. She wanted to surrender to the heat, to the safety of an alpha who could actually protect her. But surrender was death. As Malric's lips brushed hers, cold steel pressed against his jugular. Malric froze. He pulled back a fraction of an inch, his eyes drifting down to see Kaia's backup knife, a wicked, curved karambit, pressed firmly against the pulse point of his throat. Don't, Kaia whispered, her eyes fierce and hard as flint. Do not mistake adrenaline for affection, Your Majesty, and do not mistake me for one of your court ladies who swoons because you killed a spider. Malric didn't back away. He pressed his throat against the blade just enough to draw a single drop of blood. Then strike, Valkyrie, he challenged, his voice a dark caress. If you truly feel nothing, make it count. Kaia withdrew the blade, but she didn't step back. She held Malric's gaze, the golden fire in his eyes warring with the icy resolve in hers. I don't strike unarmed men, she said, her voice steady. And I don't sleep with clients. It complicates the invoice. She sheathed the karambit with a sharp click, breaking the spell. Malric let out a breath that sounded like a laugh caught in a growl. He stepped away, picking up his shredded tunic. He didn't look rejected. He looked like a man who had just confirmed that the chase was going to be worth every second. Invoice, Malric muttered, shaking his head. You are the most unromantic creature I have ever met. Romance is for people who aren't being hunted by zombie wolves, Kaia retorted, kicking snow over the fire. Saddle up, we're going back to the capital. I have a feeling the real rats aren't on the battlefield. By the time they reached the Iron Citadel, the sun was high, and Kaia's mood was low. The euphoria of the battle had worn off, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. While she and Malric had been fighting for their lives at Blackwood Ridge, the bureaucracy back home had been busy. Kaia stormed into the council chamber, Malric trailing a few paces behind her like a dark shadow. The room was filled with the smell of lavender and complacency. The High Council sat around a table laden with pastries, discussing tax levies. Lord Harrington, the royal quartermaster, a man shaped like a pear and smelling of expensive brandy, looked up, annoyed. "We are in session," Harrington sniffed, dabbing his mouth with a silk napkin. "You cannot simply barge in here, warlord. There are protocols." "Protocols?" Kaia slammed a manifest onto the table, overturning a pitcher of water. "My mercenaries haven't received rations in 3 days. The Royal Guard is eating roast venison, and my vanguard, the people actually holding the northern line, are boiling their own boots for soup. Where is the food, Harrington?" Harrington didn't flinch. He smiled, a greasy, condescending stretching of lips. "Ah, yes, a logistical error. The requisition forms were filed incorrectly. We had to divert the grain to the noble houses. Winter stock, you understand. We can't have the aristocracy going hungry." Kaia went very still. "You starved my soldiers to stock your larder?" "It's a hierarchy, my dear," Harrington sneered. "Mercenaries are expendable. Nobles are essential." Malric, leaning against the doorframe, let out a low whistle. "Bad choice of words, Harrington." Kaia didn't scream. She didn't draw her sword. She simply walked around the table. Harrington started to stand up, blustering. "Now see here, I am a cousin to the—" Kaia grabbed him by the back of his velvet collar and the seat of his trousers. He squeaked like a chew toy. With a grunt of effort, she hoisted the heavy man into the air, marched 3 steps to the open balcony, and hurled him over the stone railing. The council gasped in unison. There was a long, terrifying silence, followed by a loud splat and a muffled scream from the moat below. He landed in the manure barge, Malric observed from the doorway, walking over to peer down. He turned to the horrified council, his face splitting into a genuine feral grin. "Excellent aim. I've been wanting to do that for 15 years. "He's a lord!" one of the other councilors shrieked. "He's a thief," Kaia corrected, dusting off her hands. "And he's lucky the tide was out. From now on, my army eats first. If a single soldier goes hungry while you people are eating pastries, the next one goes out the window without a barge to catch them. Are we clear?" The councilors nodded frantically, clutching their pearls and cravats. Kaia turned to leave, her point made, but the heavy double doors at the far end of the chamber swung open with a slow, ominous creak. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Entering the chamber was a man who looked like he had been carved from old parchment. He wore robes of pure white, embroidered with silver thread, and carried a staff made of twisted weirwood. His eyes were milky white, blind, but he turned his head unerringly toward Kaia. It was the high priest, the man whose seal had been in the pocket of the infected scout. The councilors bowed low, their fear of Kaia instantly replaced by a reverent terror of the holy man. Even Malric straightened up, his smile vanishing. "Violence," the high priest rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone. "It is the language of beasts, and you speak it so fluently, child of the wastes." "I speak the language of survival, old man," Kaia said, her hand drifting to her sword hilt. "Something you seem to be paying a lot of gold to suppress." The high priest didn't react to the accusation. He stepped forward, raising a bony finger to point directly at her heart. "You think you are saving this kingdom," the priest whispered, and his voice echoed in the minds of everyone in the room, a psychic intrusion that made Kaia's nose bleed. "But you are merely fattening it for the slaughter. I have seen the threads of fate, warlord. You are not the cure. You are the infection. He turned his blind gaze to King Malric. She is a destabilizing element, Your Majesty, the priest intoned. Remove her, or the ancestors will burn this city to the ground to purge her from it. The winter solstice ball was a mandatory nightmare. It was a tradition as old as the kingdom, a night of forced gaiety, excessive wine, and political backstabbing, all wrapped in velvet and silk. Kaia stood in the center of her suite, staring at the bed. Laid out upon it was a gown of pale lavender silk, covered in enough lace to choke a goat. Absolutely not, Kaia said. The 3 handmaidens Malric had sent looked terrified. But, my lady, the king requested my presence, Kaia corrected, picking up the dress by a frilly sleeve and dropping it as if it were contagious. He did not specify that I had to look like a frosted cupcake while I was there. I am a warlord, not a centerpiece. She walked to the wardrobe where her gear was stowed. She bypassed the stained leather and rusted iron of her field gear and reached for the back. There, wrapped in oilcloth, was her ceremonial armor, polished silver steel, engraved with runic knots, paired with a midnight blue cape. It was formal, lethal, and distinctly her. The grand ballroom was a sea of jewels and hypocrisy. The orchestra played a sweeping waltz while nobles whispered behind fans, their eyes darting to the massive double doors. They were waiting for the stray, the mercenary who had thrown a lord into a manure barge. When the doors finally groaned open, the room went silent. Kaia didn't glide in. She marched. The silver armor caught the light of the 1,000 chandeliers, turning her into a living mirror. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, and no crown. Her sword was strapped to her hip, a jarring violation of ballroom etiquette that screamed power. At the far end of the room, King Malric stood by the throne. He was dressed in black formal military regalia, gold medals gleaming on his chest. He looked bored, dangerous, and utterly detached, until he saw her. He didn't frown at her defiance. He stopped breathing. Malric descended the dais, ignoring the gasp of the court. Kings did not walk to their guests. Guests walked to kings. Malric crossed the entire length of the ballroom, the crowd parting like water before a shark. He stopped in front of her, his eyes devouring the sight of the steel casing her body. I sent you a dress, Malric said, his voice low and vibrating with amusement. It was flammable, Kaia replied, keeping her face neutral. And it didn't have pockets for my knives. You look... Malric paused, searching for the word, his gaze lingering on the curve of her breastplate. Like a weapon. It's magnificent. He extended a hand. Dance with me, warlord. I don't dance, Malric. I fight. It's the same footwork, he countered, gripping her hand before she could protest and pulling her onto the floor. Just don't try to stab me during the dip. The orchestra, terrified of stopping, launched into a faster, more aggressive tempo. Malric didn't lead her gently. He commanded the space. Kaia didn't follow submissively. She matched him. They moved across the floor in a sharp, predatory waltz that looked less like a courtship and more like a duel. Every turn was a challenge. Every touch was electric. The metal of her armor scraped against the buttons of his tunic, a sound of friction that made the courtiers shiver. Everyone is staring, Kaia murmured, her hand resting on his shoulder, feeling the heat of him through the heavy wool. Let them stare, Malric growled, spinning her out and snapping her back against his chest with a force that knocked the breath out of her. Let them see that the only thing in this room strong enough to stand next to me is you. The high priest is watching, Kaia warned, catching a glimpse of the white-robed figure standing in the shadows of the balcony, his blind eyes fixed on them. Let him watch, Malric whispered, his lips brushing her ear. Let him see that he has no power here. You are the anchor, Kaia. You ground the beast. If they want to remove you, they will have to cut through me first. For a moment, the war didn't exist. The Scourge didn't exist. There was only the heat of his hand on her armored waist and the terrifying realization that she didn't want the song to end. She was falling. The Valkyrie of the waist who feared nothing was terrified of how right this felt. The music swelled to a crescendo. Malric dipped her low, his face inches from hers. The tension between them a pulled trigger. Then, the world broke. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation. A pressure wave that slammed into the castle with the force of a physical blow. The chandeliers swung violently, crystals raining down like hail. The music died instantly. A deep, resonant crack echoed through the bones of the castle, followed by the terrifying sound of shattering glass. Kaia scrambled out of Malric's arms, her hand flying to her sword. What was that? Malric's face had gone pale, his golden eyes wide with horror. He looked up at the ceiling, where the faint, shimmering dome of the city's magical protection usually glowed. It was gone. The wards, Malric whispered, the blood draining from his face. The ancient wards. They didn't just fail. Someone shattered them from the inside. From the city below, the first scream pierced the night. The sound of the wards failing wasn't a crash. It was a scream. A psychic shriek that tore through the mind of every shifter in the room, dropping half the court to their knees in agony. Kaia didn't kneel. She drew her sword. "Get up!" she roared, grabbing a swooning duchess by the back of her dress and shoving her toward the service exit. "Stop weeping and start running, unless you want to be the main course." Malric was already moving. He vaulted over the refreshment table, kicking a platter of roast pheasant into the face of a panic-stricken earl to get him moving. "The West Gate!" Malric bellowed, his voice amplified by Alpha Command. "Evacuate to the catacombs, move!" Then the windows exploded. Not one window. All of them. 30-foot panes of stained glass shattered inward as dark shapes hurtled through the openings, swinging on ropes made of woven entrails. They weren't just hollow wolves. They were Scourge shock troops, humanoid, shifting mid-air, their bodies covered in black, chitinous armor that had grown out of their own skin. They hit the ballroom floor with the wet thud of rotting meat. "Formation!" Kaia shouted, stepping in front of a cluster of terrified musicians. The first hollow lunged at her, its jaw unhinged. Kaia didn't parry. She stepped into the guard, driving her silver steel shoulder pauldron directly into the creature's throat. The impact crushed its windpipe. As it staggered back, she spun, her sword taking its head off in a clean arc. Black blood sprayed across her polished armor, ruining the shine instantly. "They're inside the perimeter," Malric shouted, fighting back-to-back with her. He caught a hollow in midair, ripped its throat out with his bare hands, and threw the corpse into the oncoming pack. The wards kept the infection out. With them down, the city is a buffet. "Go!" Kaia ordered, slashing the hamstrings of a massive wolf that tried to flank them. "Secure the throne room. If they take the Citadel Stone, they control the castle defenses." "I am not leaving you," Malric snarled, his eyes bleeding into black. "I'm not a damsel, Malric. I'm the distraction." Kaia grabbed him by his lapels and shoved him toward the main doors. "Go. I'll hold the ballroom. If you don't secure that stone, there won't be a kingdom left to rule." Malric looked at her, really looked at her, for a split second. It was a look of terrifying intensity, a promise of violence against anyone who touched her. "Stay alive, Kaia. That is an order." "Yes, my lord," she lied. Malric turned and sprinted out the double doors, shifting into his massive wolf form as he hit the hallway. Kaia turned back to the nightmare. The ballroom was a slaughterhouse. The nobles were gone, but the Scourge were pouring in. She was the only thing standing between them and the retreating civilians. "All right, you ugly bastards," Kaia grinned, blood dripping from her chin. She kicked a heavy oak bench over to create a barricade. "Let's dance." She fought for 20 minutes. It felt like 20 years. She used every dirty trick she knew. She threw wine in their eyes. She used a candelabra as a club. She severed tendons, gouged eyes, and broke bones. But for every hollow she killed, 2 more crawled through the windows. They were overwhelming her. Realizing the position was lost, Kaia cut the rope of the massive central chandelier. It crashed down, crushing a dozen hollows and creating a wall of fire and crystal. Using the chaos, she retreated into the hallway, barring the doors behind her. "Malric," she gasped, wiping sweat from her eyes. She needed to get to the throne room. She sprinted through the corridors. The castle was eerily silent now. No screams, no fighting, just the wet sound of her boots on the stone. When she reached the anteroom of the throne room, she skidded to a halt. The heavy golden doors were blasted off their hinges, lying twisted on the floor. The walls were painted with black blood, Scourge blood. "Malric?" she called out, her voice echoing in the empty hall. She stepped over the body of a royal guard. Then another. The elite soldiers had been torn apart, their armor shredded like paper. Kaia entered the throne room, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The room was empty. The throne sat vacant in the moonlight, streaming through the shattered skylight. But in the center of the room, amidst a pool of mixed red and black blood, lay a single object. It was the heavy gold crown of the Lycan king. It wasn't just dropped. It was crushed, flattened as if a massive booted foot had stomped it into the stone floor. And leading away from the crown, dragged through the blood toward the dark catacombs, was a trail of claw marks. Deep, desperate claw marks, as if someone had been dragged away while trying to hold on to the ground. The trail of blood was not a thin line, it was a broad, wet smear that vanished into the gaping maw of the royal crypts. Kaia didn't hesitate. She adjusted her grip on her claymore, ignored the screaming of her own exhausted muscles, and plunged into the darkness. The air down here was stale, thick with the scent of dry bone and fresh copper. She followed the drag marks down a spiral staircase that seemed to descend into the bowels of the earth. At the bottom, the narrow corridor opened into the Hall of Ancestors, a vast, cavernous tomb where dead kings slept in stone sarcophagi. But the dead weren't sleeping tonight. In the center of the hall, King Malric was making his last stand. He had shifted back to human form, likely forced out of his wolf by exhaustion or injury. He was shirtless, his torso a ruin of claw marks, slick with blood. He was surrounded by 3 Scourge commanders. These weren't mindless drones, they were massive, hulking brutes, clad in jagged armor, moving with a coordinated intelligence that was terrifying to watch. Malric was fighting with a broken spear he must have ripped from a statue's hands. He moved with the desperate, feral speed of a cornered animal, keeping them at bay. But he was failing. "Give it up, King!" one of the Scourge hissed, its voice sounding like grinding stones. "The hive demands your flesh!" Malric spat a mouthful of blood at the creature. "Come and take it!" The Scourge commander lunged. Malric parried the strike, but the sheer force shattered his spear shaft. He staggered back off balance. The second commander saw the opening. It didn't strike with a weapon. It unhinged its jaw, revealing rows of needle-like teeth dripping with black ichor, and clamped down hard on Malric's exposed shoulder. The sound of the bite, wet, crunching, and final, echoed through the tomb. Malric didn't scream. He went rigid, his eyes rolling back as the venom hit his bloodstream instantly. The third commander raised a heavy mace to crush the king's skull while he was immobilized. Kaia didn't think, she didn't plan, she simply ceased to be a person and became a projectile. "Get off him!" She hit the third commander from behind, driving her claymore through the chinks in its back armor. The blade pierced the spine and exited through the chest plate. She planted her boot on its back and ripped the sword free, letting the corpse drop. The commander biting Malric released its grip, turning to face the new threat with a snarl. Its mouth was stained with Malric's blood. That was a mistake. Kaia didn't give it time to reset. She dropped her heavy sword. It was too slow for this range, and drew her twin trench knives. She moved inside the creature's reach, ducking under a clumsy claw swipe. She drove one knife into its eye and the other into the soft tissue under its jaw. She twisted the blades. The creature shrieked and collapsed. The last commander hesitated. It looked at its fallen packmates, then at the small, blood-soaked woman standing over them, vibrating with a rage that felt hotter than the torches on the walls. "Run," Kaia whispered. The commander turned to flee. Kaia snatched up the shattered half of Malric's spear and threw it like a javelin. It caught the creature in the back of the knee, pinning it to the floor. She walked over and finished it without a word. Silence fell over the tomb, heavy and suffocating. Kaia turned back to Malric. He had collapsed against a sarcophagus, sliding down until he hit the floor. His skin was gray. The bite on his shoulder wasn't bleeding red anymore. It was weeping a thick, tar-like substance. "Malric," Kaia gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. She put her hands on his face. He was burning up, his skin radiating a heat that blistered her fingertips. His eyes fluttered open. The gold was fading, consumed by a creeping, milky film. "Kaia," he rasped, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "Leave. Me." "Shut up," she snapped, her voice trembling. "I don't take orders from casualties." "The infection," Malric choked out, coughing up black bile. It's fast. Faster than before. It's in my head, Kaia. I can hear them." "Look at me," she commanded, slapping his cheek lightly to keep him focused. "Focus on my voice, block them out." "You have to kill me," Malric begged, clutching her wrist with a strength that bruised bone. "Before I turn. If I turn, I'll tear you apart. Please, do it." "No." Kaia stood up, grabbing him by the arm. "Get up, we're not done." "Kaia." "I said get up," she screamed, hauling him to his feet. He was dead weight, heavy with muscle and defeat, but she wedged her shoulder under his arm and heaved him forward. "I dragged you out of a political disaster. I can drag you out of a crypt." She couldn't go back up the stairs. The castle was overrun. She looked deeper into the gloom. The royal crypts went on for miles, a labyrinth of tunnels that eventually led to the river. "Walk, pup," she grunted, staggering under his weight. "Move your feet or I'll drag you by your hair." Malric stumbled forward, his consciousness flickering. Kaia dragged him into the shadows of the deeper tunnels, away from the light, away from the war. She found a small heavy iron door, an old embalming chamber, and kicked it open. She practically threw Malric inside and slammed the door, throwing the heavy deadbolt. It was pitch black. "Kaia!" Malric's voice came from the floor, terrified and broken. "Kaia! Run!" Kaia fumbled for her flint, striking a spark to light a dusty oil lamp on a shelf. The flame flared to life, casting long, dancing shadows. She turned to look at the king. Malric was huddled in the corner. He looked up at her, and Kaia felt her blood turn to ice. His eyes were gone. The sclera, the iris, the pupil, all of it had been swallowed by a void of absolute shifting black. And when he bared his teeth, the canines were lengthening, sharpening into needle points right before her eyes. "Run!" The thing that used to be Malric growled. But it wasn't his voice anymore. It was the voice of 1,000 screaming souls. Kaia didn't run. She didn't even flinch. She stood in the flickering light of the oil lamp, staring into the abyss that had replaced King Malric's eyes. "I am not leaving you," she said, her voice steady, though her hands were shaking so hard she had to sheath her knives to keep them from rattling. "And I am certainly not running from a fight I haven't finished." Malric, or the creature wearing his skin, let out a sound that was half sob, half snarl. He slammed his fist into the stone wall. The impact cracked the masonry, dust raining down on his sweaty, gray skin. "You don't understand," Malric shouted, clutching his head as if trying to physically crush the voices inside. "They aren't just in the blood, Kaia. They are in the mind. 1,000 of them, screaming, chewing. They want you." He stumbled back, crashing into a heavy iron embalming table, crumpling it like tinfoil. He fell to his knees, gasping. "The hive. It knows you are the threat. It's using me to get close. Kill me. Do it now while I can still hold them back." Kaia walked toward him. Every instinct she had honed in the wastelands screamed at her to retreat. This was an infected alpha, a biological weapon. Being this close was suicide. She closed the distance anyway. "I don't kill my own," Kaia stated, dropping to her knees in the dust before him. "I am not your own," Malric roared, lashing out. His clawed hand swung for her face. Kaia didn't dodge. She caught his wrist. It was a stupid move. He was stronger than her on a normal day. Infected, he possessed hysterical, supernatural strength. The impact jarred her shoulder, threatening to dislocate it. But she held on. She dug her fingers into his forearm, right over the pulsing black veins. "You are mine!" she yelled back, matching his volume. "You think I stayed because of the gold? You think I fought an army of the dead because of a contract? Look at me, Malric." Malric froze, his arm trembling in her grip. He panted, saliva dripping from his chin, black and viscous. He tried to look away, but Kaia used her other hand to grab his jaw, forcing his face toward hers. "I stayed because the moment you walked into that war room, my wolf claimed you," Kaia confessed, the words tearing out of her throat. "I hate it. I hate that I'm tied to a king. I hate that I'm vulnerable. But I am not a coward, and I don't abandon my mate." The word hung in the stale air of the crypt. Mate? Malric went rigid. The confession seemed to short-circuit the chaos in his brain. For a heartbeat, the blackness in his eyes receded, revealing a sliver of desperate, golden humanity. "Kaia?" he whispered, his voice cracking. You knew?" "Since day one, you idiot," she said, her voice softening. She wiped the black blood from his lip with her thumb. "Now, fight it. You are the Alpha King. You don't submit to a parasite. You command it." Malric closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. He breathed in her scent, rain, steel, and fear. His body shuddered. "I can't. It's too heavy. It's like drowning in oil." "Then hold on to me," Kaia demanded. "I'm the anchor. I'm right here." For a moment, it seemed to work. His breathing slowed. The feverish heat radiating from his skin cooled slightly. The tension in the room broke, just enough for Kaia to think she had won. She relaxed her grip on his jaw, exhaling a shaky breath. "That's it. Stay with me. We'll find a healer. We'll fix this." Malric lifted his head. He opened his eyes. Kaia's blood ran cold. The gold was gone again. But this time, the blackness wasn't swirling or chaotic. It was still. Perfectly, terrifyingly still. The expression on his face smoothed out, losing all traces of pain or struggle. It was a blank, serene mask that was infinitely worse than the monster's snarl. When he spoke, it wasn't Malric's voice. It wasn't the guttural growl of the beast either. It was a chorus, 100 voices speaking in perfect, monotone unison through his vocal cords. "We hear your confession, Kaia of the Waste," the thing inside Malric said, tilting its head with bird-like curiosity. Kaia tried to pull back, but Malric's hand, the one she had been holding, suddenly tightened around her wrist like a vice of cold iron. "We understand now," the voices continued, a cruel smile stretching Malric's mouth too wide. "He fights us because he loves you. He resists the unity because of the bond. Let me go," Kaia snarled, reaching for her knife with her free hand. "No," the hive-mind replied calmly. "If you are the anchor holding him to his humanity, then we must sever the chain." Malric's other hand shot out, grabbing Kaia by the throat and slamming her against the stone wall, pinning her feet a foot off the ground. "We accept your surrender," the voices whispered. "Now, die." Kaia's vision spotted with gray at the edges. The pressure on her windpipe was absolute, a crushing vice that promised to turn her vertebrae to dust. The thing wearing Malric's face watched her struggle with dispassionate curiosity, waiting for the light to go out. Kaia didn't panic. Panic burned oxygen, and she had none to spare. She didn't try to pry his fingers loose. It would be like trying to bend cold iron. Instead, she brought her knees up to her chest, planted her boots squarely on the center of Malric's sternum, and kicked with every ounce of hysterical strength she possessed. The leverage broke his grip. Malric was launched backward, crashing into the stone sarcophagus of his great-grandfather. The impact was loud enough to wake the dead, cracking the heavy lid in two. Kaia hit the floor gasping, her throat burning like she had swallowed broken glass. She rolled instantly, coming up in a crouch, her trench knives in hand. She flipped the blades backward, blunt ends out. "You fight like a corpse," she rasped, her voice a wrecked croak. "Slow. Predictable. Malric rose from the rubble. He didn't look angry. He brushed stone dust from his shoulder, his movements jerky and wrong like a puppet on tangled strings. Resistance amplifies the pain, the hive-mind said through him, the voices overlapping in a dissonant harmony. Why do you delay the inevitable? We are legion. He is one. He is a king, Kaia spat, circling him. And you are just a parasite with a god complex. The entity charged. It didn't use Malric's martial skill. It used his body like a blunt instrument. It was pure, overwhelming force. Kaia ducked under a haymaker that would have taken her head off, slamming the pommel of her knife into his kidney. It should have dropped him. Malric didn't even flinch. He spun with unnatural speed, backhanding her across the room. Kaia flew through the air, crashing into the iron embalming table. The metal buckled under her spine. Pain exploded in her back, white-hot and blinding. She slid to the floor, coughing up blood. Her ribs were definitely cracked. Fragile, the hive-mind observed, walking toward her. It picked up a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. Flesh is so inefficient. Kaia tried to stand, but her legs collapsed. The entity stood over her, raising the iron bar for a killing blow. "Goodbye, Anchor," it whispered. Kaia looked up. She saw the weapon descending. She saw the empty, black void of his eyes. And somewhere, deep beneath the suffocating oil of the hive-mind, she felt Malric screaming. She didn't reach for her sword, she didn't beg. She reached for the bond. She grabbed the invisible tether that connected her soul to his, the biological imperative that said he is mine, and she yanked on it with the force of a tidal wave. Kaia surged to her feet, ignoring the agony in her ribs, and caught the iron bar mid-swing with her bare hand. Her skin sizzled against the metal, but she didn't let go. She stepped into his space, grabbed him by the throat, and unleashed a sound that wasn't human. It wasn't a scream. It was a command, amplified by the raw, ancient power of an alpha female protecting her mate. "Submit!" The word hit the room like a physical shockwave. The oil lamp flickered and died. The dust in the air suspended. Malric froze. The command slammed into the hive-mind, a sledgehammer of pure will shattering its control. The parasite wasn't built to handle alpha authority. It was a hive of drones designed to follow, not lead. Confronted with a superior command, it glitched. Malric dropped the iron bar. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, screaming. His own scream this time, raw and human. "Get out!" Malric roared, clawing at his own temples until he drew blood. "Get out of my head!" Kaia dropped to her knees in front of him. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. The blackness in his eyes was churning, boiling away like oil on water, revealing the desperate gold underneath. "Look at me," she ordered, her voice still vibrating with that terrifying alpha timbre. "I am your general. I am your mate. And I did not give you permission to die, soldier. Heal!" Malric gasped, his body arching as if he'd been electrocuted. He slumped forward, his forehead collapsing onto Kaia's shoulder. He was shaking violently, soaking her armor with sweat. For a long minute, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing in the dark. Then Malric lifted his head. His eyes were gold, exhausted, bloodshot, and terrified. But gold. He stared at Kaia, his pupils dilating as he took in the bruises on her neck, the blood on her lips. He looked at her not just as a woman he wanted, but as something else entirely. "You," Malric whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "You commanded the Scourge. You commanded me." "I told you," Kaia whispered, leaning back against the twisted metal of the table, too weak to stand. "I don't like it when people ignore my orders." Malric reached out, his hand hovering over her cheek, afraid to touch her. "You aren't just a warlord, Kaia. No Luna has ever used the command voice. That power, that is alpha blood. Pure alpha blood." "Great," Kaia muttered, closing her eyes. "More politics. Can we discuss my pedigree later? I think I broke a rib." "Kaia," Malric said, his tone shifting from awe to urgent alarm. He looked past her toward the tunnel leading deeper into the crypts. "What?" Kaia asked, opening her eyes. The hive-mind didn't leave, Malric said, his face paling. I can still hear it, but it's not screaming anymore. What is it doing? It's regrouping, Malric said, scrambling to his feet and pulling Kaia up with him. You heard it. You challenged its authority. It's not trying to convert me anymore, Kaia. It's calling every infected creature in the city to this exact location to tear us apart. Move, Kaia ordered, shoving Malric toward the drainage tunnel that led to the river. Unless you want to explain to 1,000 zombies why you're not answering their calls. Malric stumbled, his boots splashing into the icy sludge of the tunnel floor. He was moving, but barely. The effort of resisting the hive-mind was bleeding him dry. They are close, he gasped, one hand bracing against the slimy brick wall. I can feel them vibrating in the walls, like termites. Don't think about them. Think about putting one foot in front of the other, Kaia said, keeping her trench knife drawn as she checked their 6. The sound of scrabbling claws echoed from the darkness behind them, a cacophony of clicking and snarling that was getting louder by the second. The entire crypt was emptying out, flooding the tunnels to catch the rogue alpha. They burst out of the drainage grate and tumbled onto the frozen mud of the riverbank, gasping for air that didn't smell like embalming fluid. The city above them was burning. The iron citadel, usually a beacon of golden light, was shrouded in smoke. The streets of the lower districts were chaos, but not total silence. There was fighting, pockets of resistance. We need soldiers, Kaia coughed, wiping muck from her face. Where is the fallback point? The West Garrison, Malric rasped, pointing toward a fortified stone tower near the bridge. If anyone survived, they'll be there. They didn't run. They limped. Malric leaned heavily on Kaia, his black veins pulsing visibly against his pale skin. He looked less like a king and more like Patient Zero. As they approached the garrison gates, a crossbow bolt slammed into the mud inches from Kaia's boot. Halt! A voice screamed from the battlements. Identify! Open the damn gate, Lieutenant! Kaia roared, not breaking stride. It's the king! The king is dead! The soldier shouted back. We saw the throne room fall. Anyone claiming to be Malric is a skinwalker. Another bolt flew, grazing Malric's shoulder. He growled, his eyes flashing dangerous, unstable gold. Don't you dare, Kaia warned him. She stepped fully into the torchlight, spreading her arms. Her silver armor, though dented and blood-stained, caught the firelight. Look at me, she bellowed, her voice cutting through the wind. I am Kaia of the Waste. I am the one who threw your quartermaster into a manure barge. Do I look like a skinwalker to you, or do I look like the only person on this battlefield who knows how to hold a sword? Silence on the wall. Then, the heavy grinding of gears. The portcullis began to rise. Inside, the courtyard was a hospital and a morgue combined. Hundreds of survivors, mercenaries, royal guards, and civilians were huddled around fires. When Kaia and Malric entered, the silence rippled outward like a wave. They looked at Malric with fear. They saw the black veins. They saw the corruption. Weapons were drawn. A circle of spears formed around them. He's infected, a sergeant spat, leveling his pike. He's one of them. Malric straightened. He tried to summon his command voice, but he swayed, weak and feverish. The soldiers saw his weakness. The line tightened. They were going to kill him. Kaia stepped in front of the king. She didn't draw her weapon. She just stood there, radiating a violence so pure it felt like heat. The first person who tries to touch him, Kaia said, her voice terrifyingly calm, loses the hand, then the arm, then the head. He's a liability, warlord, the sergeant argued, though his pike wavered. He's the host. He is the anchor, Kaia shouted. The Scourge is a hive-mind. It has a controller. If we kill the controller, the army falls. Malric is the only connection we have to finding it. He isn't the enemy. He's the map. She turned to the crowd, scanning their dirty, terrified faces. You want to hide in this tower and wait to die? Fine. Dig your graves now. But I am going back to the palace. I am going to find the bastard holding the leash, and I am going to choke him with it. Who is with me? For a long moment, there was only the sound of the burning city. Then a mercenary from Kaia's old unit slammed his fist against his chest plate. Clang. A royal guard dropped his spear point and did the same. Clang. Then another, and another. The sound built into a rhythm, a heartbeat of steel against steel. They weren't cheering for the king. They were cheering for the warlord. Malric watched from behind her, his vision blurring. He felt the mate bond singing in his blood, stronger than the infection. He saw his army, his proud, traditional army, pledging allegiance to a rogue female covered in sewer muck. He didn't feel jealousy. He felt salvation. "The controller," Malric whispered to Kaia as the soldiers began to mobilize, checking weapons and tightening girths. "I know where he is. The hive-mind showed me." Kaia turned to him. "Where?" Malric looked up at the highest spire of the castle, the Temple of the Ancestors. "The holiest ground in the city," Malric said, a grim smile touching his lips. "It seems our traitor isn't just a general. He's family." The stairs to the Temple of the Ancestors were slick with ice and blood. It was 1,000 steps to the highest spire of the citadel, and every single one felt like a battle. "Keep moving," Kaia grunted, practically carrying Malric's weight on her left side while her right hand kept her claymore raised. "We're almost there. Don't you dare pass out on me now." Malric stumbled, his boots catching on a loose stone. He was sweating shivering bullets, his skin burning so hot it could probably fry an egg through his tunic. "They know we're coming," he wheezed, his voice laced with the distortion of the hive mind. "Corvic? He knows." "Corvic?" Kaia asked, kicking open the heavy oak door at the top of the landing. "Your uncle? The one who knits in council meetings?" "He doesn't knit," Malric muttered, gripping the door frame to stay upright. "He weaves." They stepped into the temple. Kaia expected monsters. She expected a horde of hollows tearing down the tapestries. Instead, the vast, circular chamber was terrifyingly silent. The moonlight filtered through the glass dome, illuminating the statues of past kings. And there, standing before the obsidian altar, was Duke Corvic. The elderly wolf looked exactly as he always did, unassuming, dressed in modest gray robes, with a kindly face that made you want to ask him for hard candy, except for the fact that he was currently washing his hands in a golden bowl filled with thick black Scourge blood. At his feet lay the body of the high priest, his throat slit. "You're late, nephew," Corvic said, drying his hands on a silk cloth. He didn't look up. He spoke with the casual disappointment of a tutor addressing a tardy student. "And you brought the stray. How predictable." "You let them in," Kaia said, stepping forward, placing herself between Malric and the altar. "The wards, the infection. You killed your own people." Corvic finally looked up. His eyes weren't black like the Scourge. They were clear, sharp, and utterly insane. "I culled the herd," Corvic corrected gently. "The kingdom has grown soft, my dear. We trade, we negotiate, we tolerate weakness. The Scourge is not an enemy. It is a forest fire. It burns away the rot so something stronger can grow." He gestured to Malric, who was leaning against a pillar, gasping for air. "Look at him," Corvic sneered, his kindly mask slipping. "The king of wolves, brought to his knees by a woman and a virus. He resisted the hive mind. That was unexpected. He was supposed to be the first to turn. A puppet king to lead the new order. He resisted because he has something you don't," Kaia spat, raising her sword. "A spine." "He has you," Corvic observed cold. "You are the variable I didn't account for. The anchor. You grounded his humanity when he should have dissolved into the collective." Corvic picked up a jagged black crystal from the altar. It pulsed with a necrotic light humming in the same frequency as the veins on Malric's arm. "If I kill you, he breaks," Corvic mused. "But if I break him, you die." Kaia lunged. She didn't wait for a monologue. She crossed the marble floor in a blur of silver steel, swinging for Corvic's neck. She was fast, but Corvic was prepared. He didn't dodge. He simply crushed the black crystal in his hand. A shockwave of dark magic exploded outward. It didn't hit Kaia. It went straight for Malric. Malric screamed. It was a sound that tore at Kaia's soul. He arched backward, his spine bowing to the point of snapping. The black veins on his arm exploded outward, racing up his neck, across his face, and flooding into his eyes. "Malric!" Kaia shouted, skidding to a halt and turning back. "Don't touch him!" Corvic laughed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "I just accelerated the incubation. 10 days of infection in 10 seconds. Say goodbye to your king, warlord." Malric collapsed to the floor, convulsing. When he looked up, the gold was gone. The struggle was gone. His face was a mask of pure, void-like emptiness. He stood up slowly. His movements were fluid, lethal, and completely silent. He turned toward Kaia, his hands curling into claws that dripped with black ichor. "Malric?" Kaia whispered, lowering her sword slightly. "Malric is gone," Corvic declared, spreading his arms in triumph. "Kill her, my pet, tear her heart out and eat it." The thing that used to be Malric tilted its head, looked at Kaia, and smiled. "Yes," it said, its voice a hollow echo. "My lord." Malric didn't move like a man anymore. He moved like smoke. 1 second he was standing by the altar. The next he was inside Kaia's guard, his hand clamped around her throat. Kaia didn't try to break the grip. She couldn't. The strength behind it was hydraulic, crushing. Instead, she dropped her weight, brought her knees up, and kicked him hard in the chest. It was like kicking a mountain. Malric didn't budge. He simply tightened his grip, lifting her off the ground. "Inefficient," the hive-mind droned through his lips. "Your heart rate is elevated. You are afraid." "I'm pissed off," Kaia choked out. She drove her thumbs into his eyes. Most opponents would scream and recoil. Malric didn't even blink. But the mechanical reaction of his body forced his head back just enough for Kaia to twist free. She dropped to the marble floor, gasping, and rolled away just as his fist smashed into the spot where her head had been, cracking the stone tile. "Beautiful," Duke Corvic applauded from the shadows, sipping a glass of sacramental wine he'd poured for himself. "He fights without hesitation, without morality. He is the perfect weapon." Kaia scrambled to her feet, drawing her claymore. Malric turned slowly, his face blank, his movements eerie in their stillness. He didn't draw a weapon. He raised his claws, which were now dripping with the same black sludge that coursed through his veins. "Malric!" Kaia screamed, circling him. "I know you're in there. You are the Alpha King. You don't take orders from a glorified knitting circle." Malric lunged. Kaia parried, her steel meeting his claws with a shower of sparks. The force of the blow rattled her teeth. He struck again, high, low, high. A relentless barrage that drove her back toward the balcony edge. She was fighting for her life, but she was fighting with a handicap. She refused to strike a lethal blow. "He can't hear you, my dear," Corvic taunted, stepping closer to watch the spectacle. "The man you knew is drowning in the dark. There is only the directive now, and the directive is to purge the anomaly." Kaia misstepped. Her boot slipped on a patch of blood. Malric backhanded her. The blow sent her flying across the room. She crashed into the base of a statue of the first king, her armor crumpling. Pain exploded in her ribs, white and hot. Her sword skittered across the floor, out of reach. Malric walked toward her. He didn't rush. Death didn't need to rush. Kaia tried to push herself up, but her arm gave out. She slumped against the cold stone, watching the monster approach. She looked at Corvic, who was grinning. She looked at Malric, whose eyes were twin voids of nothingness. She realized then that steel wouldn't win this. You couldn't cut a ghost, and you couldn't stab a memory. "Okay," Kaia whispered, spitting blood onto the pristine floor. "We do it the hard way." She didn't reach for her hidden dagger. She didn't scramble for her sword. She closed her eyes. She stopped fighting the physical battle and turned all her rage, all her fear, and every ounce of her stubbornness inward. She grabbed the frayed, darkened thread of the mate bond that still lingered between them, the psychological tether that Corvick claimed was broken, and she yanked on it with the force of a desperate god. "I am here," she screamed silently, projecting the thought directly into the void of his mind. "I am the anchor. You don't get to leave, you don't get to rest. Wake up, pup." Malric froze. His claws were inches from her chest. His hand trembled. The hive-mind tried to force the strike, pushing the muscles to contract, but the arm wouldn't move. "What is this?" the hive-mind whispered, confusion rippling through its monotone voice. "System error. Control. Compromised." "It's not an error," Kaia rasped, looking up at him. "It's an order." She reached up and grabbed his wrist. It burned like dry ice, but she held on. "Corvick thinks you're a weapon," she said, her voice cracking. "Prove him wrong. Prove to me that you are the king." Malric's head snapped back. A guttural sound tore from his throat, half roar, half sob. He fell to his knees in front of her, clutching his skull. The black veins on his face pulsed violently, warring with the natural flush of his skin. "Finish her!" Corvick shrieked, dropping his wine glass. "Kill her now! Override!" Malric looked up. One eye was still pitch black, but the other was a burning molten gold. He looked at his own hand, poised to rip Kaia's throat out. Then he looked at Corvick. Slowly, painfully, Malric lowered his hand. He took a breath and the air rattled in his chest. When he spoke, the voices of the hive-mind were still there, but they were being drowned out by a singular, furious growl. "Override!" Malric snarled, his golden eye blazing with murderous clarity. "Accepted." "Impossible," Corvick hissed, stepping back as Malric rose to his full height. The golden eye of the king burned with a ferocity that made the shadows in the room recoil. The dosage was lethal, the assimilation should be absolute. "You forgot one thing, Uncle," Malric growled, his voice a chaotic mix of his own baritone and the hive's distortion. He took a step forward, and the marble floor cracked under his boot. "I am not just a host, I am the alpha." Malric raised his hand. He didn't strike Corvick. He turned his claws inward, plunging them into his own chest, right over his heart. Kaia screamed, "Malric, no!" But he wasn't committing suicide. He was performing an exorcism. Malric roared, a sound of pure, agonizing defiance, and ripped his hand away. He didn't tear out his heart. He tore out the magic. A stream of thick black sludge erupted from the wound, sizzling on the floor like acid. He was physically rejecting the parasite, forcing it out through sheer force of will and biology. Corvick panicked. The connection was severing. The army of monsters outside would become mindless again. "If I can't control the beast," Corvick shrieked, drawing a jagged ceremonial dagger from his robes, "I will put it down." He lunged at the weakened king. Malric, mid-purge, was defenseless, his body convulsing as he expelled the darkness. Kaia didn't think. She didn't calculate. She moved. She intercepted Corvick inches from Malric's chest. She didn't have a weapon. Her sword was across the room, so she used her body. She slammed her shoulder into Corvick's chest, tackling him to the ground. They rolled across the altar steps. Corvick was old, but he was fueled by madness and dark magic. He backhanded Kaia, the ring on his finger cutting her cheek. He raised the dagger. "You filthy stray!" Corvick screamed, bringing the blade down. Kaia caught his wrist. Her grip was slippery with blood, but she held on. She looked into the Duke's eyes, the eyes of a man who would burn the world to rule the ashes. "I'm not a stray," Kaia snarled, headbutting him with a sickening crunch of cartilage. "I'm the exterminator." She twisted his wrist, forcing the dagger from his grip. She snatched it out of the air before it hit the ground and in one fluid motion drove it into the Duke's throat. Corvick gasped, his eyes widening. He slumped back against the altar, the black blood of the Scourge mixing with his own. Across the room, Malric let out one final, earth-shaking roar. The black veins on his skin flared white, then vanished. He collapsed to his knees, heaving for breath. The blackness in his left eye dissolved, leaving behind 2 pools of brilliant, exhausted gold. Silence fell over the temple. The screaming of the hive-mind in the distance ceased instantly, replaced by the confused howling of unguided beasts. Kaia crawled over to Malric. She was bruised, bleeding, and exhausted. She reached out and touched his face. "Malric," she whispered. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "Is it quiet?" he asked hoarsely. "Yeah," Kaia said, resting her forehead against his. "It's quiet." Then the heavy doors of the temple burst open. The coronation of a Lycan king was usually a solemn affair involving incense, chanting, and a lot of kneeling. This was not that. The great hall of the Iron Citadel was packed, but the roof was still missing in places, and the attendees were wearing bandages over their formal wear. The air smelled of fresh pine and victory. Malric sat on the throne. He looked tired, but the darkness was gone. He wore his crown not as a divine right, but as a job he had fought to keep. "Kaia of the Waste," Malric's voice boomed, echoing off the repaired stone walls. The crowd parted. Kaia walked down the aisle. She wasn't wearing a dress. She wasn't wearing the crown's jewels. She was wearing a new suit of armor, black steel with gold inlay commissioned by the king himself. Her hair was braided back for war, and her boots were loud on the stone. She stopped at the foot of the dais. She didn't bow. "You summoned me, Your Majesty," she said, her tone professional, though a smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. "I assume my final payment is ready. I accept gold, land, or the Duke's estate." "I have a different payment in mind," Malric said, standing up. A ripple of whispers went through the court. Here it comes, they thought. The marriage proposal. The queen consort title. Malric walked down the steps until he stood eye to level with her. "The position of general is too small for you," Malric said. "And queen implies you are merely my wife." He pulled a scroll from his belt and handed it to her. "I am creating a new title," Malric announced to the room. "High Warlord and Protector of the Realm. You answer to no one but the crown. You command the armies, you secure the borders, and you have the authority to throw anyone you like into a manure barge." The crowd chuckled nervously. Kaia took the scroll. She looked at him, surprised. He was giving her power, not a leash. "And," Malric added, his voice dropping so only she could hear, "I would very much like to court the High Warlord, assuming she has time in her schedule for a king." Kaia looked at the scroll, then up at him. "I might have an opening on Tuesdays." "I'll take it," Malric grinned. He turned back to the throne, but instead of sitting, he paused. He looked at the heavy velvet chair, then back at Kaia. Malric sat down on the steps of the dais, right at her feet. He crossed his arms, looked up at her standing above him in her gleaming armor, and flashed a smile that was all teeth and devotion. "The war is over, Kaia," Malric said, echoing the words she had spoken to him the day they met. "The army awaits." He tilted his head, his golden eyes shining with mischief. "Orders, my lord?"